There's this old trope that we only use 10% of our brains. That's not true. But as far as efficiency goes, probably somewhere in that general area, right? Because we don't know how to think anymore. We don't know. We're not teaching or thinking in a way that promotes additional thought and education.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a special guest today, Aiden Buzzetti from 1776 Project PAC. How's it going?
Going well. How are you doing?
I'm living the dream. It's humid as shit in Texas right now. Very, very irritating. But luckily, this is it's brief here. We don't have to deal with too much of that nonsense. But we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about principles and being a citizen. Before we get into your PAC and what you guys do, because I'm very interested in this, I'd like to talk about you for a moment. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in metro Atlanta suburbs from Cobb County. Went to school up here in DC at American University, and let me just tell you, it's kind of insane the environment up here with the students. So it was probably the biggest adjustment that I had going from Georgia up north. There's a couple hundred miles.
I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, so I'm not too far away, but I don't know exactly what's in Cobb and what's in Fulton County. Where's the line at exactly?
I was probably 20, 30 minutes away from Fulton County border with traffic, maybe 40. It's gotten kind of crazy there.
So a pretty conservative area. If it's outside of the major cities in Georgia, it's usually pretty conservative, right?
Yeah, it was fairly conservative up until probably the last couple of years. I think it flipped for the first time in 2016, actually. But before that, very, very conservative. Even now, a lot of the families there are, the typical moderate, suburban, and conservative types.
And what do you think it was that was the impetus for that change? Why did it turn, I guess?
That's kind of an interesting question. For Georgia specifically, it's a lot. It's related to the broad demographic change. A lot of people are coming into Georgia. Hollywood, the tax credits, how Hollywood hasn't really been helping that case. But the metro Atlanta suburbs have been exploding in population. There's a ton of development. So we've seen some pretty rapid changes there.
Why do you think population increase is almost always associated with a red to blue shift politically?
That's a good question. I think that part of it is probably the broader shift in college-educated voters. I mean, that's probably at least 90% of it. If you go to college now, you are more likely to vote for a Democrat or be more liberal than if you don't go to college. That wasn't really the case in elections previous to 2016. It used to be more likely that if you were non-college educated, you were voting for a Democrat. That's totally flipped. So I think that's probably the biggest part of the change here.
I wonder why that is. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You would think the smarter you get, the less you would trust the government.
Well, the university system hasn't really been creating the smartest people nowadays.
Yeah, fair enough. It is kind of a shit show right now. So you left the Atlanta Metro and went to DC, which is a whole other animal. I don't know, where exactly is American University in DC? Is it in Georgetown or something, or where is it?
It's northeast DC. It's relatively close to Georgetown. It's in the or near the street, Embassy Row, where all of that runs. But I mean, the whole city is liberal. All the college campuses are super progressive. I think just about every college in DC is doing one of those encampments right now. So there's no escaping it here, no matter where you go.
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm confused. I'm just a little like I know that young people are highly motivated, I guess. It does seem a shame that our most motivated people are almost always the most ignorant as well. It seems like a lot of wasted effort, but it does occur to me that if they're upset with their university for using their endowment to invest in Israeli related things, they could just stop paying and go to another university, right? I mean, instead of camping
Yeah.
outside like a bunch of assholes.
Well, the university is their safe space. That's where they get to go, have a little camp out, make all of their demands, and get told yes every single time they want something. You go in the real world, you can't really have that.
I don't know if you saw that one woman at Columbia demand. She was demanding humanitarian aid, but what she meant was fucking hamburgers and shit because they've locked themselves into a
Yeah.
building. Oh my god, man, that's like oh boy, we may live in the dumbest period in all of human history. I think there's an argument to be made for that. To be honest.
And a lot of times those people, professors join these protests. I mean, professors are the ones teaching these kids to take performative actions like that. Um, that extends to the teacher certification and graduate programs. So we have a whole generation of teachers that, and part of our thing is we have a whole generation of teachers that has been taught all this critical theory.
Mm,
So they feel most important when they're doing something performative like this. And on top of that, they don't actually know how to teach kids correctly. We've had 40, 50 years of teaching people how to read a way that doesn't actually work. It doesn't teach people how to read consistently.
mm.
And we have just absolutely plummeting test scores, reading and math comprehension everywhere, every school, well, every public school at least, and in all grade levels. And these are the people that are going to be going to college too. So it's just a completely screwed up system right now.
Sure, yeah. A lot of people have been talking about this lately, but I'm not sure how familiar you are with the process. But what do you know about this pipeline of higher ed accreditation? And it used to be for higher ed. Now it's a pipeline that also kind of infects primary education, where people, as you mentioned, kind of get the people who are going to become teachers get indoctrinated with critical theories, DEI, and such, and then they're kind of placed in schools all across America, and we're seeing big problems with it, right? I mean, it isn't just isolated to blue states or blue cities. There are red states and red cities that have primary educators trying to pull the same bullshit that you would expect to see in much bluer areas. So I wonder if you're able to, can you explain what that pipeline is? Because I know you guys kind of fight against this stuff in education.
Yeah, we've run up against that a lot. I would say the most extreme example that I have seen, we did a school board race in Bentonville, Arkansas. I believe it was almost a year and a half ago. Uh, Super red area, right? I mean, it's in Arkansas,
It's the home
and
of
we,
Walmart.
yeah, the home of Walmart. Well, we discovered that the school district was offering teacher and administrator trainings based on this booklet that compared white people to toxic groundwater. It was just full of the most like extreme diversity, equity, inclusion. White and Asian people are privileged and like bad for society type of content, and it was sponsored by Walmart. I mean, Walmart offered it to the school district for free, and they took them up on it. Um, but it relates to the broader problem that we've had is these school districts hire a lot of consultants. They bring in a lot of outside education experts to train teachers, to train principals or other administrators. A lot of the times they're focused on equitable practices. So they hire these consultants that come in and say, "Oh, you're punishing black students two times more than you punish white students. That's inequitable. So here's how to fix your policy." And they don't actually end up punishing students. Or they might say, you need to train your teachers that diversity is good for our schools and they need to be including more people of color in their lessons or highlighting, the ethnic differences between different students in their class. So it's not even just the teachers, it's that these education, quote unquote, professionals and consultants come in and take over the whole system and make these recommendations to the school board, to the administrators who do a lot of the day-to-day management. And there's no challenge here. If a school board member comes in and tries to fix the budget or questions the effectiveness of these programs, they get called racist and get booted off the board or shunned by their community. So we have this problem where the professors and a lot of these teacher certification programs are full of this critical theory, the critical pedagogy that teach teachers that social movements, social justice movements, or equity are the ideal goals for society. So then these teachers take it to the classroom. And in the school districts where teachers push back, the district will hire a consultant to unilaterally change curriculum or change disciplinary standards with no oversight. They just take whatever's recommended and run with it.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, this is a problem of centralized authority. It's why we have a system of government called federalism, right, to prevent shit like this from happening. It's very bizarre to me how frequently in in pretty much every front-facing public institution, a lot of power tends to amass in the hands of one or a few people, right? And people who don't have the jurisdiction or the statutory authority to make those changes. I mean, I'm sure, I doubt you're a proponent of the Department of Education. There's no reason for that to exist. I mean, that's the dumbest shit of all time. But even if we were to have some kind of standardized board, I guess, maybe call it a peer review for the type of publications we put into our primary education facilities, it seems like it should be pretty disparate personnel wise. I don't know if I would go so far as to say diverse, because that word is kind of toxic these days, but it would be, I guess the question really is, what is the purpose of primary education? Like, what exactly are we trying to do with a human being from the ages of 6 to 18? What are we preparing them for? And are the things we're doing preparing them for that? Because I don't see how, even myself, I graduated high school in '99. I don't remember. I remember doing a lot of stupid bullshit that has no meaning in life anymore, like learning trigonometry. Let's be real, man. I've never, well, that's not true. Shooting rifles, I've used formulas before that are technically trigonometry, but I didn't remember it from high school. I just learned it on the spot. But we never learned how to like change tires, which is something that pops up from time to time. How to file taxes, how to balance a banking account, checking account, or anything like that. I just wonder, from your perspective, do you see, is there any sensible action going on in primary education right now? Because it seems like it's just indoctrination, and that's kind of how it started in the early part of the 20th century. Henry Ford and others just wanted compliant workers. They wanted factory workers, smart enough to run the machines, and not so smart that they would understand how badly they're being fucked. But it seems like now it's taken a turn, right? Because we have people coming out of high school that are completely unprepared for life. It wasn't uncommon even up until the 90s, early 2000s maybe, where a guy or a girl would graduate high school and just immediately go into some kind of career or whatever, right? Now it seems like, well, it's not seems like, we see the data. The average 25 to 30-year-old is still living at home now and not out on their own. That's fucking crazy to me.
Yeah, my personal experience, I had the opportunity to go to a really good high school. So my high school had financial literacy classes, had shop classes, 3D printers for people that really wanted to get into engineering or architecture, things like that. Most students don't have that. And so when I think about education, education, right, for the purpose of creating a worker, I think is bad. I don't think it's actually useful for society. When we think of how education used to function, it was on creating a good and virtuous citizen, somebody who is broadly knowledgeable, right? And certainly in the Western tradition of classics, so they would have some kind of understanding of the Bible, of some kind of language. They would know the basic form of math at the very least. They would have read things like Plato and Aristotle and some of the other classics in Western philosophical tradition. That isn't really covered much any now or anymore. A lot of the curriculum is more contemporary, and that's a teacher's choice in many cases, and also the school board's choice. But I think you're right. We need to be focused on creating well-rounded people. Teaching certain job skills or general skills like financial literacy, I think, is extremely important. More and more schools are starting to do that because it's necessary. Today's world is much, much, much more complicated, right, than the early 20th century or the 19th century. Um, but are we developing the right kind of people to take on those solutions or to take on the more complex world now? I don't think that's the case. And a lot of conservatives have advocated for getting rid of public school, right? Or some kind of school choice program, which had varying effects. I think getting rid of public school is most likely a fever dream. I mean, more than 60 million students, over 80% of American students go to public school. That's probably not going to change anytime soon. And so when I see that statistics, I think to myself, okay, we have millions, tens of millions of students are going to public school. Public schools are getting worse and worse and worse and worse, no matter how much money you throw at it. So what does the crop of the future look like? Are we just educating a bunch of people that are going to forget everything in a couple of years or are not really learn actual lessons, how to be virtuous, right? How to be a good citizen, given a good moral compass to operate in society? If we don't develop people like that, then, the next 20, 30 years as these people grow up and start to interact in society are going to be awful. I mean, completely awful.
Yeah, there's a lot of movement in this school choice arena, but there are some states where it's never going to fly, right? Because that's a state legislature issue for the most part. And absent a supermajority, even if you own the legislature, you don't have the governor, you're not getting that passed anyways. Now I know Corey DeAngelis. I appreciate the work he's doing, but yeah, it's like that's part of it. That's not a full solution yet.
Yep.
So,
our work has been. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go. You go.
Yeah, our work has been not solely focused on school choice, and Corey DeAngelis does great work. School choice has momentum in a lot of different states, and like you said, it's part of the solution. But there's still millions of people in public school, and one of the best ways to start fixing that system is to put actual conservatives, people actually concerned about education, onto these school boards because they're the ones that set the curriculum. They're the ones that set the rules. They're the ones that hire the superintendent and the administrators, who then hire the teachers. And if it's the right people setting these standards, then we can see a turnaround. It just takes a lot of effort. I mean, there are over 14,000 elected school board positions across the country. Our PAC, we've elected over 220, which is fantastic. But there are still thousands more that we can try and positively change.
You mentioned something before that kind of jumped out at me. You said that people are being taught how to read in a way that's not correct. Can you explain the way that they're being taught that's not correct and then what the correct way would be?
So it's something called the look-see method. It's used, also 3Qing is another teaching method. Basically, the concept is to teach a child how to read, you look at the word dog, and then you point at a picture of a dog. And then they learn to correlate the word with the animal. which it works well for this general concept when you're a toddler or maybe in elementary school. But as you get further and further into reading, where there's more abstract concepts, you're not going to be able to understand what you're reading.
Mm.
And people who don't understand how to read or understand what they are reading in the first place will not read. If you do not read, you cannot engage in society more likely than not. You don't know how to read contracts, a lease, your credit card statement. I mean, let's be real. So the way that really we should be teaching our kids, and we have taught our kids previously, is through phonemic methods. That's basically A is A, B is B, C is C. Like teaching kids how to pronounce each individual letter of the alphabet and then tying them together in the word is the right way to teach children how to read if you actually want them to be good at it. So if you want somebody to understand the word xylophone, right, without ever having seen the physical instrument before, they need to know each individual sound of the alphabet to be able to put that together. But if you teach somebody only to correlate a photo of a dog with dog, if they see, a photo of a cat, they're not going to know it's a cat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or if it's something incredibly more complex that doesn't actually have a physical form, how are they supposed to understand that? Teachers have been using that method, the three cueing method, the look-see method, for 40 years now. It's been the dominant form. That there's a lot of education worrying about it at the moment, and there have been for a long time, but it's been the dominant way to teach people how to read. And it makes sense now that, well, I went back and I talked to my parents, I talked to my relatives, and a lot of them say, oh, yeah, I don't really read that much. It's kind of difficult. I have trouble understanding some of the words. So even my parents or my relatives, my aunts and uncles, can have trouble reading because they were taught through this method that doesn't actually work if you want somebody to comprehend something in the adult world.
Well, comprehend it in a way that you're able to apply the lesson you learned, learning that first part, right? That's really important. This is the teach a man to fish part of primary education that we do seem to whiff on, right? We teach people what and not how to think. We've abandoned the Socratic method. Phonemic awareness is really, I mean, we use this same strategy in a lot of other different areas. One of the primary areas that we use it in is the classification of species, right? It's a hierarchy from domain, kingdom, phylum, all the way down to genus and species. And the purpose of that is almost like showing your work on a math problem. You can go back and find where the mistake is. Now, in the inverse of that, when you're learning language, phonemic awareness allows you to understand what a root word is. Anybody that's seen a spelling bee on television knows what I'm talking about. It's like, what's the etymology of the word? And they'll tell you. It's like, oh, okay, so it's a Latin word, so I know that it's going to have these characteristics. And I also know that these word fragments that are part of this full word are spelled a very particular way, right? So now, you're getting a much more full spec. And this is good information, by the way, for people who are homeschooling their children as well, or people who are just like looking into what their kids are doing. If you're a parent, you should definitely be looking at every assignment your kid brings home, not necessarily for any kind of weird bullshit, but just to make sure they're actually learning how they're supposed to be learning. You know what I mean? Teachers vary. And curriculum varies as well. Sometimes, I mean, I can't imagine trying to teach 35 to 40 9-year-olds in one classroom for an hour and a half. That seems fucking crazy to me. Most people can't control their one 9-year-old at home, right? So good for them for even making the attempt, but it is a village, right? I mean, I really wish someone would explain to parents better how it is exactly people learn things, because I think they would be a lot more engaged in the process if they understood that the concept of information recall, where you can study and learn for 30 to 45 minutes, but then your brain needs some amount of time off doing something else before it can before the creases or folds or whatever memory function is happening in your brain actually takes effect, so you can actually remember things and develop recall over time. Because we don't have an information storage problem. I don't think it's a bandwidth problem. It's a recall problem, right? Like your brain is big. It's a petaflop, so it moves fast as well. We just don't know how to properly recall and stuff like that. And no part of primary or secondary education that I took part in, and I've got a master's degree, ever taught me how to learn properly. It was always something else, right? It was like, here's all the information, good fucking luck. It's like, all right, well, maybe we should at least spend the formative years diving into the minutia, if you want to call it that. Like, here's what you're doing, but here's how the process works. And I think if you go to school for engineering or programming, like computer programming, that's how it works. The only time that I ever experienced that type of education is when I was learning computer engineering and programming logic specifically, because it wasn't enough to you'll spend a month or two writing flowcharts of if-then statements and things like this, so your brain begins to understand how to do that. And it's like, then you get into the real world and there's a problem. You're like, oh, I know how to do this. I at least know that. I may not know the specific answer here, but I know the process by which to find the answer. And that's all university is good for, in my opinion, at least the undergrad, is learning how to look shit up and learning how to format a paper. I think those are two really important skills to have. I'm not sure it should take 4 years and cost $120,000 to learn that skill. Probably learn it at the library, to be honest. But yeah, it's weird how we've. There is some nefarious part to it. In the early 20th century, Marxism did infiltrate the university system, but there's also a lot of just bureaucratic incompetence going on, right? And while like people like your organization who recruit people to go into school boards and things like that, that's great, and it's going to have an impact. But I think the parent or the community member also has to take a little bit of responsibility here. You know what I mean? Just to pay attention to what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of my work is working hand in hand with these community parent groups. We would not exist without parent groups that are willing to step up and make an issue out of something that is, unfortunate. And we've seen things from bullying disputes to certain books in libraries to general dissatisfaction with superintendents, or there are a wide variety of issues that really only parents can solve in their communities, and we're only one part of the problem here. Like we're only one part, one cog, right, in the machine that parents have to start changing things. A lot of the weight is on them, which is why you're right, it is so important for them to get involved. It's important for them to keep their school board members engaged, because they're also people that run as conservatives. They get on the board, the teachers union comes to them, or their lawyer starts telling them things, and sooner rather than later they start not doing the things that they promised when they were originally running. And if they know that they've lost the support of their parents, it will force them off the board. It will make life a little bit more difficult. And going to a school board meeting once every couple of weeks and getting yelled at for 4 hours is not fun. And people don't want to deal with that. And that's one way that parents can make a change. Just force the hand of their elected officials. It's not really that hard.
Yeah, certainly. Some level of community involvement is required. I mean, that is the gravity that holds the star together, I guess, right? And here's how I know that the Department of Education is useless. So on multiple occasions throughout human history, or rather many, many occasions, we've experienced these paradigm shifts in the way we do business. New jobs have been created, old jobs have gone away, creative destruction, we call it, right? A new technology displaces a bunch of workers, and we have the option to forecast that in some way or another and be like, all right, cool. Oh, that's where the phrase learn to code came from, by the way, which was a derisive term, but it wasn't wrong. And unfortunately, it didn't come from the Department of Education. It came from assholes in Congress. But talking about primarily people that were getting displaced from coal mining jobs in the coal belt there, whatever you call it. But creative destruction happens all the time, and the reason I know that the Department of Education is fucking pointless is that at no point in American history since the Department of Education has existed have they been ahead of the curve on this stuff. Have they seen it coming? Like, oh, it looks like we're probably going to lose a lot of jobs in the textile industry or the coal industry or whatever. Let's backstop this. Let's start lower ranked middle and high school, start training people or edging or pushing people towards the new career field that's actually going to exist when they get out of school or get out of college or whatever it is. Not once has that ever happened, right? And that should, if there's any purpose for the Department of Education, it would be that. It would be a small governing board to look into the future and be like, all right, cool. It looks like we're going to need a lot more people to operate the machines that build Teslas or whatever the fuck, right? Or install solar panel or whatever. We don't do that. It's like not once have they actually done that. So I'm like, man, what is exactly the point of view?
Yeah, I mean, like everything in DC, it's bloated and incompetent, right? I mean, you can't get past that, and having that many layers on the education system is probably one of the reasons why it's been failing. The only one thing that the current Department of Education under Biden is doing is they're tying a lot of these school grants to implementing DEI initiatives or the new Title IX ruling that's currently being held up in court at the moment. That's something that conservatives, maybe the next Republican administration, can take advantage of. But until you maybe reform or totally dissolve the Department of Education, there's always going to be an extra federal layer that makes things more complex. A lot of school districts and states rely on federal grants. And as long as the Department of Education keeps doing student loans and keeps doing these federal grants to states and to school districts, we're going to have some kind of mission creep here. It's how they've been injecting a lot of this diversity, equity, and inclusion into these local school boards. It's actually a lot of the time how these school boards end up hiring these consultants in the first place. There's an entire industry where these progressive, critical theorists in education, maybe they go through government, maybe they don't, but they end up getting hired because there's a mandate from the government that gives money to a school board that says you need to use this money for this purpose. So all of our critical theorists, all of these consultants that are implementing these measures are basically paid for by the federal government. There is a chance that if Republicans win this November, that they can reverse it, that they can flip it around and say, actually, you can only get funding if you get rid of these programs. But the issue is going to remain if the office ever flips back.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it doesn't. It's a good thought experiment because the sign of the three tenets of a good law are that it's clear, concise, and enforceable. Right, clear in that it's very specific, concise, and that it only deals with the one thing and it doesn't give broad ranging powers to the federal government or the state government. And then enforceable where it has teeth, like there's an actual penalty for not following it. And then part of that is also being fungible into the future from one party to another. So, think of it in the most extreme of terms. What's going on in El Salvador right now with this guy who's essentially a dictator, right? But he's doing all of the right things so far. It's like, all right, cool. So you give one man extreme power, and sometimes he's going to do a lot of the right things. What happens when it's Caligula, right? Because when it was Augustus Caesar, it worked out pretty well. Pax Romana, all this stuff. The rebuilding of the empire. Rome was stronger than it ever was. And even a sense of piety back in the community, banning slavery, not for ethical reasons, but because freedmen were running out of jobs. Like a lot of good things happened under the rule of one man. And then Caligula started cutting off dog heads and wearing it for his head, right? So it's an interesting question of how you're going to insulate the future. This is the problem with government. The neocons in the early part of the 21st century were like, oh, the terrorists are going to get us. We got to pass this Patriot Act so we can spy on everybody. Well, we're not spying on terrorists anymore. We're spying on American citizens. It's like, yeah, that's how it works,
Yeah.
right? So I'm curious what your thoughts are on what kind of anything from legislation to local action that can happen to accomplish this stuff that makes American education resilient into the future. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, well, number one, the Constitution gives states explicitly the, purview over education, right? So it is fundamentally a state issue, and then sometimes they devolve it locally. So on the parent level, number one, start showing up to your school board meetings and asking questions. That's all you need to do. People will feel the pressure. There are a million other groups that help parents learn how to submit Freedom of Information Act requests, how to organize each other, and really start being activists in their community. That is important. But one of the more interesting things that I've seen is this rise in classical education. And I think it goes back to what you were mentioning about the Roman emperors, right? If you want people to realize that absolute power corrupts absolutely, they need to have a good understanding of what has happened in history, right? What were people debating thousands of years ago about this very thing? It's not new, right, in government. It's not new for humans to debate politics, to debate the struggles of power and what's good and what's bad and when. And we used to have that. Now, classical education is primarily private at the moment, and there's classical Christian, which focuses a lot more on biblical studies. There's classical, which is more of the broader Western canon in history. But we are able to put this into public school. So we're able to take these moral lessons that informed our founding fathers, that informed generations of American citizens, but also thousands of generations of Europeans before we even came to this continent. It's always been here. So if we're able to implement these classical education models in the public school system, I think we'll start seeing things turn around. We helped flip Miami-Dade School Board in Florida. It is the third or fourth largest school board in the country by student population. And in August, they started implementing a classical education program for their students. They're one of the first school districts to do that. It's starting to happen more and more in Florida and a handful of other states. On the private school side, all of these classical, especially the classical Christian students, have higher test scores on standardized tests. They report higher happiness and more fulfillment in their schools. Their schools don't have discipline issues. So it's the complete opposite of the situation we see in our public schools. One of the best ways I think we can start fixing that is by taking that same model and bringing it back to where it used to be for every single student in the U.S.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that psychology works, and it isn't necessarily that disparate between human beings and other animals, right? So to the point about less disciplinary problems for the kids in these other types of models, it is somewhat counterintuitive, but it is a fact that a dog becomes more fatigued by walking on a leash and obeying commands than it does by running around in a field all day. It could run around in a field for like 3 hours, lose its fucking mind, and it's going to be tired. But you can accomplish the same thing by going on a 30-minute walk and at every stop sign telling them to sit, stay, wait, and then get up and go again. This is there's plenty of research on this. In the same way, look and say versus phonemic awareness, it's not even close, right? Like you're actually think of it this way. If you're still confused on that issue, it's the difference between having a TV show on in the background while you're looking at your phone, or actually being engaged in what's going on, right? Like it's a completely different experience. Not just in the efficiency of taking in the information, which is also true in a big, and that's the most important part. But the downstream effect of that is that the person has worked and accomplished something, right? And I think this flashcard method, which is just a memorization technique for the most part, right? Is one, it's very or one dimensional, rather, excuse me, one dimensional. And then second, it doesn't really challenge the mind that much. So of course kids are fucking like, this is like, I've done all the work you needed me to do in a tenth of the time that you needed me to do it in. Now what? Instead of like, when you teach them how the process works, then they go out looking for more answers. That's how that works, right? Like if you teach someone how a watch works, not my Apple Watch obviously because it's digital, but like how a mechanical watch works, they're going to want to understand more about that, and then maybe understand how other mechanics work as well. If you just like give them low level examples of what it is, like this is a watch, it tells times, like all right, cool, man, what else you got for me? I mean, we think we're so much smarter than nature for some reason. I really don't understand it. I mean, this stuff is basic, and that's why, to your point from a minute ago, talking about classic education, man, we had this figured out for over 2,000 years now. We've had this figured out, but we keep fucking it up. I mean, the middle part of the second millennia, sure, we had some religious authoritarianism. We systematically kept people illiterate. Those days are over, right? That's not a thing anymore. You have all the information in the world at your fingertips. And I think it's, man, there's this old trope that we only use 10% of our brains. That's not true. That's just not true. It makes for good movies sometimes when you see a super genius person made, like that Lucy movie, but it's not true. But as far as efficiency goes, probably somewhere in that general area, right? Because we don't know how to think anymore. We don't know. We're not teaching or thinking in a way that promotes additional thought and education. It's like, man, maybe that's why we were able to get away with large classroom sizes in the 1920s, whereas we can't now, right? I don't think it's just about cultural or discipline problems. I think they actually were thinking back then. They were making the kids think, so they were tired. They were too tired to fucking talk shit. I mean, there's always going to be some of it, but why? I don't understand this. It's like, the only way that it makes sense to me is that no one in a position to make these rules either cares or understands what it is we're training these kids for, right? That's what it seems like to me.
I don't think that that's an entirely incorrect thing to say. A lot of the time, the performance of the superintendent of a school is judged solely based on the graduation rate, right? What's the percentage of students graduating from the school district? That is the completely incorrect way to think about things. There are schools that have an 80%, 90% graduation rate, and when you go look at their scores, they're below the national average for math, reading, everything. So what's the point in graduating somebody if they can't actually learn,
Yeah.
if they don't know anything?
Well, and a lot of these places, because of No Child Left Behind, a Bush era education policy,
Yep.
they developed this policy, which is fucking wild, called social promotion, right? And it's where a kid is illiterate, can't do math, but because they're the same age as everybody else, it's like, well, we can't have you around a bunch of 10-year-olds, so you got to go with the 14-year-olds. Like, sweet. And people graduate, like, I'm sure you know more data on this than I would, but there are certain school districts around the country, Baltimore is one of them, where kids are graduating that don't know how to fucking read. Like, they read at a first, I mean, reading levels is subjective and nonsense, to be clear, but it's still a metric that's there to use. So people like a third grade reading level are graduating high school just because they don't have the time or resources to deal with that kid anymore. It's like, that can't be our answer.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you this. Mississippi passed this bill to promote literacy in 2013. They went from 49th to 29th in reading proficiency in 6 years.
I mean,
All
Mississippi and South Carolina and a couple of other states have been the bottom five for 40, 50 years now, right?
yeah.
So what was the policy they enacted and how did it change?
Well, part of the policy was they required kids graduating from third grade to have a third grade reading proficiency level. They just stopped passing kids up the chain for failing. That's one of the main things that they did, and they went up the charts in like an insane amount in a very, very short period of time. The basic lesson here is stop promoting kids for failing. That's all you need to do. That's step one. There's no point in graduating a student from fourth grade to fifth grade if they've underperformed in all of their fourth grade classes. Sometimes students need more time. Sometimes, they have something difficult, some extant circumstance that puts them in that position. But for the vast majority of kids, if they don't perform well the first time, don't send them up to a higher level. Mississippi was one of the worst states in the country for reading proficiency, and now that's no longer true. All it took was one piece of legislation, and that was one of the main, that was the core component of it.
That's really interesting how small of an effort can produce such huge results for, I mean, that because I think Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, I don't remember the other states. I think Maryland may have been one of them as well. But they were like perennially rather, the fucking bottom five primary education ratings in the entire country. It's weird to see how it's almost infuriating to see how easily that problem was solved. Frankly, right? Now, this is again. There's good research on this, and here's how I know that it's actually good research, is because it came from NEA, which is one of the most evil organizations on the planet, if you ask me. They're right there, parallel with the WEF, but they did studies back in like the 2011-2012 time frame in California about every kind of classification of a student you could think of. Gender, age, socioeconomic class, abuse versus non-abuse, all sorts of stuff. And the only true predictor of academic success that they found was that was across the board was parental involvement, right? That's the only time you knew that a kid was going to be successful, is that the parent actually cared enough to check on them. So, there's a lot of moaning and groaning. Our education system is definitely fucked up. And not everybody has the opportunity to go to a private school or homeschool and shit like that. But you do have options, right? Like listening to people like you guys, other people in the education space like Corey DeAngelis, who know about this stuff. I mean, go find a podcast on education and listen to it and apply those rules to your child when they come home, right? Look over their homework and stuff like that. There are options. And then, I feel like once people become more confident in that stuff, that's when you're going to start to see more and more people voluntarily reach out into the school board and not just go to the meetings, but actually run for the offices, which is even more important, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the peak of, the main driver of the candidates we've been supporting over the last few years were running for school board because the pandemic, the lockdowns, the mask mandates, watching people teach their kids online was what drove these parents to actually get involved. So if you find your why, do it. I mean, running for school board can be tough. It's a lot of time, but it's 100% worth it for your kids and the kids of your community. We hit our peak, right, with all these mask mandates when parents were pissed off about the local government not listening to them or the state imposing all of these mandates. It may not be related to masks now, but there still are mandates being imposed. The school board is probably still not really listening to parents. So if you just take one small thing and you make your voice heard, you can make a lot of change. And I would say, the biggest thing for parents to do, like what you said, is be involved with your child's education. Look at their assignments. Talk to them about school. Make sure they're actually going to school. Absenteeism is really bad right now. Kids are not going back to school. The high school near me in Washington, D.C. has an absenteeism rate of over 80%. That means kids are missing more than, I believe it's 2 weeks of school throughout the whole school year. It shouldn't be like that. We should be encouraging our kids to go and learn and have a system that actually helps them learn. But it starts at home. It 100% starts at home.
Yeah, and to expand on that a little bit, people don't like the people that listen to the show, people who are parents of children in school, people who are just community minded, don't think of themselves as someone who should or could hold public office, right? But you're exactly who should hold public office. I mean, the alternative is to allow career politicians to hold those roles for 40, 50 years at a time. And, the only way to stay in office that long is to make money off of your service, right? Which should be impossible. It should be impossible to become rich working for the government in any way. But that's the alternative. That's the choice you have to make, and that's what this show is all about. It's you can bitch and moan about your rights and complain about the government, or you can step up and do something, right? And this is one of the things you can do. At the very least, you can insulate your children and teach them. But I think if we really want to turn this around, the country, education, all this stuff, then it's going to require the active participation outside of just voting for the lesser of two evils every 2 to 4 years. That shit's not going to work. You're not going to vote yourself out of this. Participation is the only way that this happens. And, you know, it's easy. It's a lot easier to sit around and bitch about it, frankly. And it's even satisfying to some degree to feel righteous and like, yeah, I'm right and they're definitely wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you believe the things that we're talking about, you're definitely right. And these people are definitely assholes. But, what have you actually accomplished? Because we all know they're assholes already. That's not helping anybody. And it brings up one of the principles of the show is I'll promote equality of opportunity, not outcome, particularly when I'm in a position of power and wealth. And it reminds me of one of my first sergeants in the Army, Kenneth Johnson, told me that if you don't like the way things are, then do all you can to rise to a level of power and then affect change where you can, right? Well, here's your opportunity. It doesn't take that many votes to win a school board race, frankly. Like
Exactly.
they're usually a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand votes in a big place. And I got to tell you, the people that are voting on that stuff, a lot of them are parents, and a lot of them are pissed off about what's going on here. So
Yep.
it definitely behooves everyone involved to
Right.
to participate in this process and not just vote. Like voting isn't participation; that's the least you could do.
And to really hammer that home, I've talked to school board candidates, even grandparents, people that have to walk with canes, or even in one case, someone who can't walk. They're running for school board. They're still going out and knocking on doors and going to events and engaging with their community. It takes effort. I mean, running for office takes effort, as do most important things, but it is 100% possible. No matter how busy you are, how busy you are with your wife and your kids, with your job, people make those sacrifices and it pays off. They're there for their community and they're actually able to implement positive change. And the cherry on top is education is not necessarily a partisan race. Most school board races are nonpartisan, so they don't mark your party on the ballot. And even among the most liberal voters, education is still one of the number one issues. People want their kids to be given every opportunity to succeed. There are more liberals that are open to equality of opportunity, not equity, who are more open to expanding gifted programs, expanding resources for students, than liberals who want total equity in their schools. Who they're in Seattle, they actually got rid of these advanced schools because it had primarily white and Asian students in it. Now they're sending everybody to the neighborhood schools, all in the name of equity. So all of these advanced students no longer get those advanced resources. Most people do not agree with that. And if you share those values, people will vote for you and you will win.
Yeah, and then there's the other issue, because this is all fun to talk about and stuff, but people there is a an informational barrier to entry for running for public office, right? People don't know what the fuck they're doing, frankly, because it's similar to the tax code. They make this as complicated as possible to try to keep people from, protecting or representing themselves. Probably lawyers did that, because they want to get paid, but who cares? Uh, you know, the reason I wanted to have you on is to talk about this specifically. When people ask me if they should join a federal service or the military, I'm like, probably not right now. I don't trust any of these people, but you can go be a sheriff's deputy. You know what I mean? Like there's so many ways to serve your community without getting involved in the swamp bullshit. But again, when it comes, and it's easy to, not easy, but it's like understandable how to go into that career field. People can figure that shit out. But how to run for office is a little bit more difficult. So that's why
Yeah.
organizations like yours are important. They haven't existed on the conservative side before relatively recently. Like Emily's List has been around for decades now, right? For since the 1970s, I think. Emily's List is an organization that recruits female candidates to run for the Democratic Party, particularly those who are extremely pro-choice, right? That's their whole mission, is to do that. Yours is the only one I'm aware of that recruits and trains people to run for school boards and things like that. We don't have there's no functioning organization out of all the ones that exist, NRA, FPC, USCCA, who recruit candidates who are pro Second Amendment, for example, right? That pack doesn't exist. So it's like it's good we're catching up now. So the reason I brought that up is that is what you guys are doing at 1776 Project. Tell people if they're interested in running for their local school board how they can get involved in your organization and get some help.
Yeah, go to 1776projectpack.com. We have an application for endorsement. It goes right to me. If you are running for school board or you even want to hop on a quick call and talk with me about your options, reach out there and I will be in touch with you. We're happy to help out.
And then you run another organization called Bull Moose Project. Tell me about that.
So the Bull Moose Project, we do a lot of America First advocacy. So we actually spend a lot of time here in DC meeting with members of Congress to make sure they're not screwing over the American people. And we are now going to the state level. So similar concept. We're going to local officials, we're going to state officials, and we're making sure that they have the information they need to keep putting the interests of their citizens first. Things like banning central bank currencies or banning sanctuary cities in their states. We've worked on all of those issues. We're trying to put the interests and the rights of Americans first by reaching out to these officials who are most closely engaged with their communities in the first place.
Good. Yeah, I like that idea a lot, actually. Because there's a lot of motivated people out there, and because of the internet, because there are a lot of people who are way more informed about these issues than they would have been 20, 30 years ago, right? But what good is information without putting it to use? Faith without works is dead, as the Bible likes to say. And I think that's true here, too. Good intentions are all swell, but when are you going to pick up your rucksack and start marching?
Right.
And I think now is as good a time as any, if not the most important time in American history to start getting involved with these things. So everybody go check out 1776 Project Pack. If you're interested in running for school board, definitely hit them up, see what kind of information you can get. And I think it's super important right now that people get involved at a local level. I mean, if 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 we were if our skyscraper was starting to lean to one side or another, we wouldn't start by repairing the top, right? That's not how that works, and it doesn't work here either. The meaningful and lasting repairs will happen at the bottom, at the foundation, and it's how it works now. It's how it will always work. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming on the show to talk about it today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an important issue, and I hope more people learn about it and get engaged.
Yeah, for sure. And tell everybody again one more time where they can find all your properties, all your websites and stuff.
Yeah, 1776projectpack.com. And if you want to email me directly, it's Aiden, Aiden, at 1776project-pack.com.
There you have it, folks. Go check it out. Thanks again for coming today. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.